All right, let's get right into it. We are going to explore a behavior that, let's be honest, we've all seen. Maybe we've even done it ourselves. It's that absolute, stubborn refusal to admit when you're wrong. It can be so frustrating, right? And so confusing. But today, we're going to unpack the real reason behind it, and it's a lot more fragile than you might think.
So I want you to picture a scene. You're in a disagreement with someone. You've laid out all the facts, your point is crystal clear, and you're just waiting. You're waiting for them to just say, okay, you know what, you're right. But instead of a big argument, something totally different happens. There's no yelling, no fireworks.
That's the response. Just silence. A sudden, heavy quiet that just sucks the air out of the room. The conversation just hits a brick wall, the other person shuts down, maybe they even turn away, and you're just left there, with the truth just hanging between you, totally unresolved.
It's such a powerful form of denial, isn't it? It's like they believe if they just don't look at the mistake, if they don't acknowledge it, it will literally just cease to exist. And that kind of reaction can be even more confusing than an actual fight. It leads us to a really big question.
Seriously, why? Why are those three little words, I was wrong, so impossible for some people to get out? What is happening underneath the surface that makes a quiet, silent retreat feel safer than just saying sorry?
So let's start right there, with that unspoken apology. Because that silence, it isn't just an absence of noise. It is a defense mechanism in action.
And let's be real, when someone digs their heels in like that, our minds usually jump to a few pretty familiar conclusions about them.
But what if I told you this whole thing is about way more than just being stubborn? What if those labels we jump to are actually missing the entire point?
Yep, these are the usual suspects, right? We see this behavior, and our brain immediately goes, oh, they're just too proud, or wow, how arrogant, or they're just being immature. And look, those words describe what we see, but they don't explain the why behind it.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This response isn't coming from a place of strength or superiority. Nope, the real reason is much quieter and much more fragile. It actually comes from a place of deep vulnerability.
And this is the absolute key to understanding this. The refusal to admit you're wrong isn't an act of ego. It's an act of self-preservation. It's driven by a profound, and often totally subconscious, fear.
So a fear of what? Why would being wrong feel so profoundly unsafe to somebody? Well, it comes down to a psychological concept called identity collapse.
I want you to really try and imagine this. For some people, being wrong about one thing isn't just about that one thing. It feels like a verdict on their entire character. The internal logic is something like, if I was wrong about this, then I must not be the good, capable, smart person I thought I was. Admitting one fault feels like it could bring the whole house of cards that is their identity crashing down.
So where does a feeling like that even come from? Well, as you can probably guess, it often starts way back in childhood. If you grew up in a home where love and approval felt conditional, you got praise for getting good grades, but got the cold shoulder when you messed up, you learn a very dangerous lesson. And that lesson is, your worth is tied to your performance. Mistakes aren't learning opportunities, they're evidence that you are fundamentally inadequate.
And so, when that deep, terrifying fear of being unworthy gets triggered by a mistake, these defenses just kick in automatically. It's a reflex. You get that silence we talked about. Or just outright denial. You might see deflection, where they change the subject. Or they might minimize it. It wasn't even a big deal. They are all just different strategies to avoid that terrifying feeling of identity collapse.
So you can see how this one core difference, how a person relates to their mistakes, creates two completely different internal worlds.
On the one hand, you've got the fragile identity. For this person, every mistake is a direct threat to their self-worth, and everything they do is motivated by this fear of being unlovable. But then, on the other hand, you have the safe identity. For them, a mistake is just an event. It's something that happened. It's not who they are. They feel secure enough in their own value to know that admitting a fault won't cost them their relationships or their place in the world.
And this, right here, is the most important insight of all. The ability to apologize, to say, I was wrong, isn't really a sign of strength. It's a sign of safety. It means that person feels secure enough in themselves and in their relationships to know that a mistake won't lead to them being abandoned or condemned.
Because this is the question. This is the unspoken, vulnerable question that's hanging in the air underneath all the denial and all the silence. It's the raw fear that is really driving the whole thing. It's not, I don't want to be wrong. It's, if I am wrong, are you going to reject me?
So knowing all of this, what's really needed here? Because understanding this fear, it changes our entire approach to the situation.
Well, for one, it explains why trying to corner someone and force them to apologize is almost always a terrible idea. It almost never works. Because when you do that, you are actually confirming their deepest fear. You become the threat they're afraid of. So the more you push, the higher their defensive walls are going to go.
So what does a better approach look like? Well, the goal isn't to expose their error. It's to create emotional safety. And let me be really clear here. Understanding their fear is not the same thing as enabling or excusing harmful behavior. You absolutely still need boundaries. But if you can approach it with compassion, you can see the wound that's causing the behavior. And that lets you address the action without attacking their fragile sense of self.
So this is really the main takeaway. The next time we see this behavior, instead of our brains immediately labeling it as arrogance or pride, we can try to reframe it. We can try to see it for what it so often is, a deeply ingrained automatic act of self-protection. It's a defense that was built a long, long time ago to protect a very wounded part of themselves.
And maybe that's the most powerful thought to end on. Some people aren't refusing to apologize out of spite. They're refusing because somewhere along the way, no one ever showed them that it was possible to be imperfect, to make a mistake, and to still, without any question, be worthy of love.